Welcome to the Person-Centered Planning training. This lesson involves watching this video and then reviewing the attachments. There are three what I think are very valuable attachments. First, there is a copy of the Florida 65E15 regulations that govern case management services. Second, there is a very thorough guide to the person-centered planning process called What Really Matters. And then third, there's a nice article about person-first language, and then that attachment also includes some exercises where you can practice person-first language. The attachments also include a PDF copy of this PowerPoint that you can print for your convenience. When you are comfortable with all of the material, you're required to take the quiz that is attached to this lesson with a passing score of at least 70% in order to complete this lesson. Person-centered planning has been defined by the Institute of Medicine as a highly individualized, comprehensive approach to assessment and services that is founded on an understanding of the person's history, strengths, needs, and vision of his or her own recovery, and includes attention to issues of culture, spirituality, trauma, and other factors. Person-centered planning allows systems to move away from a deficit-based approach to mental health and substance use disorders and treatment delivered by experts, and move more toward a recovery-based model of collaboration, growth, and achievement. In a recovery-based model, the individual becomes an equal partner in the recovery process. Person-centered planning may be defined in a different way. It can be defined as determining or discovering how a person wants to live his or her life, and then deciding what is required to make that possible. The overall aim of person-centered planning is good planning leading to positive changes in people's lives and services. Person-centered planning is not so much a new technique for planning as a new approach to, or a new type of planning that is underpinned by a very exacting set of values and beliefs that is very different to the current norm. It is planning that takes as its primary focus a person, as opposed to a disability or a service or some other particular issue. It is whole person oriented as opposed to disability management focused. It is about citizenship, inclusion in family, community, and the mainstream of life, and self-determination, and can therefore require some very fundamental changes in thinking and the established balances of powers, the implications of which are potentially enormous and far-reaching. While there is another training in this training curriculum regarding recovery, I do want to mention here that recovery is a philosophy that supports the idea of person-centered planning. SAMHSA noted in 2011 that recovery is a person-driven phenomenon. They wrote that self-determination and self-direction are the foundations for recovery as individuals define their own life goals and design their own unique paths toward those goals. Individuals optimize their autonomy and independence to the greatest extent possible by leading, controlling, and exercising choice over the services and supports that assist their recovery and resilience. In doing so, they are empowered and provided the resources to make informed decisions, initiate recovery, build on their strengths, and regain control over their lives. While Samsa was writing about the recovery philosophy, they could also have been writing about the person-centered planning philosophy, because the concepts of self-determination and self-direction are foundational to person-centered planning. Person-centered planning seeks to craft a vision for a person's life as a part of their local community and or the broader mainstream of life, and to describe the actions needed to move their life in that direction. It accomplishes this through, first, discovering and responding effectively to the various hopes, abilities, and concerns of the individual. Second, understanding and addressing the core issues for the individual, exploring where the person is now, how they would like their life to change, and what bringing about that change might entail. Third, identifying and exploring the choices that are available to the individual. Fourth, mobilizing and involving the individual's entire social network, as well as resources from the system of services, in responding to what is expressed and helping to bring about whatever changes the individual desires. And finally, making arrangements to follow up on plans on a regular basis in order to go through them, review progress on them, and to update them. Despite the fact that the process behind a person-centered plan may be largely recovery-oriented, the translation of this process into the actual language of the planning document itself continues to be a challenge for many providers who are committed to creating person-centered plans. The following are offered as overarching guidelines that should be considered regarding the language that is incorporated in both written documents and verbal interactions. First, the language used is neither stigmatizing nor objectifying. At all times, person-first language is used to acknowledge that the disability is not as important as the person's individuality and humanity. For example, a person with schizophrenia versus a schizophrenic, or a person with an addiction versus an addict. Employing person-first language does not mean that a person's disability is hidden or seen as irrelevant. However, it also is not to be the sole focus of any description about that person. To make it the sole focus is depersonalizing and derogatory, and is no longer considered an acceptable practice. Second, the language used is also empowering, avoiding the eliciting of pity or sympathy, as this can cast people with disabilities in a passive victim role and reinforce negative stereotypes. For example, just as we have learned to refer to people who use wheelchairs as opposed to the wheelchair-bound, we should refer to individuals who use medication as a recovery tool as opposed to people who are dependent on medication for clinical stability. Third, words such as hope and recovery are used frequently in documentation and delivery of services. Fourth, providers attempt to interpret perceived deficits within a strengths and resilience framework, as this will allow the individual to identify less with the limitations of their disorder. For example, an individual who takes their medications irregularly may be automatically perceived as non-compliant, lacking insight, or requiring monitoring to take meds as prescribed. However, this same individual could be seen as making use of alternative coping strategies such as exercise and relaxation to reduce reliance on medication, or that person could be praised for working collaboratively to develop a contingency plan for when medications are able to be used on an as-needed basis. Finally, we need to avoid using diagnostic labels as catch-all phrases as a means of describing the individual. For example, using the phrase, "This person is a 22-year-old borderline patient with such and such." These labels often yield minimal information regarding the person's actual experience or manifestation of their illness or addiction. Alternatively, an individual's needs are best captured by an accurate description of his or her functional strengths and limitations. While diagnostic terms may be required for other purposes, such as classifying the individual to support reimbursement from funders, their use should be limited elsewhere in the person-centered planning document. Person-centered planning keeps the focus on each person as the key decision maker in his or her own life. This life planning process is rooted in what is most important to the person and involves the person directly with his or her community, network of connections, and close personal relationships in order to look at innovative ways to attain life goals and dreams. The system used for person-centered planning and the plan that results are flexible. As people's interests and priorities change, the planning process is revisited as often as necessary to ensure that both major and day-to-day decisions also change in response. Person-centered planning leads to transformation in a person's life when creative new directions and approaches are taken. People move toward the realization of specific life dreams and into a world of greater possibility for new goals to emerge. The person-centered planning process involves 4 different factors. First, planning is person-centered. Person-centered planning is a life planning process that examines unique ways to attain life goals and dreams. Person-centered planning focuses on what is most important to the person and directly involves the person with his or her community, network of connections, and close personal relationships. Treatment usually works best when it is consumer-led and controlled. When the individual determines a personal path to recovery, it allows for a self-determined life. The individual defines personal life goals with the service provider, and together they design a unique path toward those goals. Individual pathways to recovery reflect the individual's unique strengths and resilience, needs, preferences, experience, and cultural and ethnic background. The focus is on increasing the consumer's ability to cope successfully with life's challenges, on facilitating recovery, and on building resilience, not just on managing symptoms. The partnership between healthcare providers, consumers, and family members determines the services and treatments based on the consumer's needs and choices, not on the convenience of the service delivery system. This includes choosing the healthcare providers who will be on the team. The service plan is updated based on the changing needs across the individual's stage of life. Included in the service plan is an individualized backup plan for what is to be done in the event of a crisis. An individual may want to create an advance directive, which is a legal document that describes the services desired if an illness reduces the person's ability to make decisions. Number 2, the plan identifies and integrates natural supports and paid services. The person-centered plan states an individual's personal visions for the future. The plan incorporates individually defined goals and priorities tied to major life areas. The plan identifies available public and community resources, including financial resources, natural or unpaid supports, paid services, and finally action steps for achieving personal outcomes including the supports that are needed. The plan enhances natural supports that already exist and incorporates paid services into the life of the person, which build upon but do not replace the natural supports. All services, whether paid or unpaid, are integrated into a coordinated service plan designed to lead to improved health and quality of life. Beyond specific behavioral health care services, individuals may choose or need other supports that should be considered as part of the plan, such as housing, supported employment, or peer counseling, among many others. Number 3. In the service plan, informal community supports are used. Person-centered supports and services incorporate supports and resources closest to the person, such as friends, families, neighbors, co-workers, members of faith communities, other informal and generic community resources, as well as public service opportunities. Consumer self-help and family involvement are an important part of effective mental illness and substance use disorder treatment. Consumers network with peers to find solutions to their problems, avoid isolation, and learn about available social supports in the community. Consumers participating in self-help programs often experience increased independence, refine their coping skills, and obtain feelings of empowerment. Families, in particular, play a role in the care and development of systems of care for children with serious emotional disturbances, identifying and helping to connect needed supports and services. Service plans that emphasize recovery include a commitment to personal independence and integration into community life. They identify supports that may be of assistance, such as supported housing, vocational rehabilitation, and consumer-run activities that promote recovery. These plans can help an individual increase independence and participation in community life, and improve functioning at work or at school. And finally, planning is responsive to changing priorities, opportunities, and needs. Person-centered systems are flexible and can change the array of supports to reflect the person's changing priorities and goals. Person-centered systems encourage opportunities for new partnerships and support and provide ongoing training for all participants in the person-centered planning process. Person-centered models focus on personal interests and outcomes and not specific services, supports, or programs. There are always alternative pathways to achieving individual priorities. The supports that work for one person may not work for another. Flexibility is demonstrated by the availability of intermittent supports, that is, supports that can be arranged when they are needed and disappear when they are no longer needed. Above all, the individual needs to dictate the services. Two people with the same diagnosis may have distinctly different needs. Further, as the needs of the consumer change, the services provided must change with them. Consumers are empowered to control their own life choices. Mental illness and physical health are connected and are considered together in planning. Older adults with major physical health issues often develop depression. Likewise, mental illness and substance use disorders often contribute to the deterioration of physical health. Thus, supports are beneficial to help address physical health issues when needed and to address co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. Co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders are resolved most successfully when addressed simultaneously. The Medicaid Mental Health Targeted Case Management Handbook lists the requirements for a service plan. Specifically, that handbook states that the service plan must be an identifiable document, It must be developed in partnership with the recipient and the recipient's parent, guardian, or legal custodian where applicable. The plan shall describe the recipient's service needs and the activities that the mental health targeted case manager will undertake in partnership with the recipient. The plan shall contain measurable goals and objectives derived from the recipient's assessment, and it must have identified time frames for achievement of those goals. The plan will include the name of the individual or agency responsible for providing the specific assistance or services, and it shall be consistent with the recipient's treatment plan. The plan shall be signed and dated by the recipient's parent, guardian, or legal custodian if the recipient is under 18 years of age, and also signed by the recipient's targeted case manager and the mental health targeted case manager supervisor, and finally, the plan must be retained in the recipient's case record. The 65E15 regulations that govern case management services also include requirements for service planning. Specifically, those regulations state that service planning is the process of developing a general strategy to utilize strengths and address weaknesses identified through case monitoring and through assessments. The case manager, in conjunction with the client, shall be responsible for the development of the service plan. However, service planning is a collaborative effort which also involves family members, service providers, or others significant to the implementation of the resulting plan. The results of the service planning process shall be a service plan. The service plan shall be on a single identifiable and dated document which is developed within 15 days of a completed assessment and reviewed and signed by the client, case manager, the case manager supervisor, and other appropriate participants involved in the service plan development. The service plan is an individualized document which meets the comprehensive needs of the client. All service plans shall be included in the client's record. In cases where immediate services are needed, service delivery shall not be delayed pending the completion of either the assessment or the service plan. The service plan shall contain a description of the long-term desired outcome for the case. The plan shall also contain measurable goals and objectives derived from the assessment of the client's strengths, deficits, and resource needs. Each objective shall have an identified time frame for achievement and be stated in terms of observable and measurable outcomes. Additionally, each objective shall state the name of the individual or agency responsible for the action to be achieved. The client shall be provided a copy of the service plan, and this shall be documented in the record. With the approval of the client, others involved in its development or implementation shall be provided with a copy of the service plan. The Medicaid Mental Health Targeted Case Management Handbook also includes the timelines for the service plan. The handbook states that each recipient must have an individualized service plan written within 30 days of initiation of services by his case manager or case management team. The manual also discusses what the purpose of the service plan review is and the frequency that it must occur. The handbook states, the service plan review is a process conducted to ensure that services, goals, and objectives continue to be appropriate to the recipient's needs and to assess the recipient's progress and continued need for mental health targeted case management services. The recipient's eligibility for continued case management services must be reevaluated during the service plan review. The activities, discussion, and review process must be clearly documented. The recipient, the case manager, and the case manager's supervisor must sign and date the service plan review. The service plan must be reviewed and revised as significant changes occur in the recipient's condition, situation, or circumstances, but no less frequently than every 6 months. Documentation of the service plan review must be recorded in the recipient's case record. The person-centered service planning process begins with the completion of a strength-based assessment with the recipient of services. Following the completion of that assessment, a person-centered service plan meeting should be arranged. During that meeting, the individual's circle of support should be included in the service plan meeting. At the end of this slide, I'm going to talk specifically about what a circle of support means. During the meeting, the case manager should document the individual's strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences as have been identified during the strength-based assessment process, and the long-term desired outcome should be specified. After identifying the long-term outcome, the service planning meeting should then move to the identification of long-term goals that are in the consumer's language, using the consumer's words. After the goals have been identified, the meeting should move to identifying specific steps that will help to reach that goal and who is going to be responsible for each of those steps. During the planning meeting, it is critical that the planning meeting identifies natural and community supports as well as professional services. The service planning process is not a process for identifying what professional services are going to be provided to the individual. I said I was going to talk about circle of support. The term circle of support for plan development is used to refer to everyone a person might like or need to be involved in developing or working out their plan, including family, spouses, friends, advocates, specialist and non-specialist service providers, and local community groups. The initial and continuing involvement of any particular individual, group, or organization in any part of the planning process should be in accordance with the wishes of the person at the center of the planning process and that particular individual, group, or organization. The role of the individual's parents, family, and close friends in person-centered planning is generally acknowledged as hugely significant for the planning process. The main concern of the person-centered planning is, of course, the focused person, and that person's wishes must be upheld. Even so, planning must also take due consideration of the views of those key individuals in the person's life, particularly in developing person-centered plans for young people or people who have high dependencies. Where an individual does not want a family member to be directly involved in his or her planning process, this issue can be explored but should not be forced. It must be acknowledged that parents and family members can be a valuable source of information in developing plans and a great help in getting plans put in action. Regardless of whether they have been directly involved in the planning process, parents and family are frequently impacted by the plans. The matter of consulting parents and family members on those parts of the plan that are likely to impact them should be addressed as part of the planning process, and the views of parents and family members on those issues should be sought, acknowledged, and explored. Where the individual and his or her parents or family or service providers hold very different views on a particular issue, every effort must be made to fully understand the reasons for these differences of opinion and to explore how they might be satisfactorily addressed. Should conflicting views prove irreconcilable, the views of the focus person should be taken as paramount and included in the service plan. As indicated in the regulation, each person-centered plan must be placed on an identifiable form. These forms vary widely depending upon the agency where the case manager is working. There are a couple of things that are always included on the person-centered planning form, but there may be additional information that is included on the form at specific agency. First, there should be an identified long-term outcome for the individual. Next would be goals, followed by specific objectives and activities and action steps, and who is going to be responsible for the completion of those objectives, activities, and action steps. Everything on the person-centered planning form should have an identified timeline, and then finally, the required signatures of the participant, the case manager, and the case management supervisor are included on the person-centered planning form. This slide ends the lesson on person-centered planning. Please review the handouts that are attached to this lesson, and when you are comfortable with all of the material, you're required to take the quiz that is attached to this lesson with a passing score of at least 70%.